Unboxing TNT, a podcast that unpacks contemporary national issues and advocates for more effective representation and innovative solutions related to those challenges facing all of us. Tune in for fact driven insights and stakeholder perspectives, and learn how you can do your part to make a real difference. Subscribe on YouTube and follow on social media for updates. Now, let's get started with this episode of Unboxing TNT with your hosts, Anarion Mason and Rudolph Hanamji.
Hello. Welcome to episode 7 of Unboxing TNT. I'm Rudolph Hanamji, and we'll be looking at the TNT budget 2024 to 2025 fiscal year. For this episode, I'm so pleased to be joined once again by my co-host, Anarion Mason. Anarion, we're on episode 7 and it's budget night here in Trinidad and Tobago.
Well, yes, Rudolph, it is budget day, budget night. What a day it's been, both in the country and personally. But before we get into that, you know I love to remind our viewers to like and subscribe on YouTube,
Yes.
as well as follow us on social media, where you will find updates and content. We're doing new types of content as well on our social medias. So you can check us out on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, as well as X, formerly known as Twitter.
Twitter.
Now, Rudolph, the budget, steadfast and resolute, forging pathways to prosperity, presented
Indeed.
none other than presented by none other than the Honorable
Colin
what's his name?
Imbert,
Colin
Minister of
Imbert,
Finance.
Minister of Finance. He's been here for 10 years and I nearly forgot the man's name. Wow.
No comment.
A lot's been going on. But before we dive in, Rudolph, what's your background? I see mountain ranges there.
That is indeed the Northern Range because this photo was taken from an airplane as we were flying over the Northern Range. Sorry, as we were flying over Caroni
Mm-hmm.
and with a beautiful view of the Northern Range. And given tonight's topic, I thought this was an appropriate photograph because really and truly the national budget will impact every sector of society, each geographical location, sector, individual, institution, and it deals, of course, with everything from infrastructural projects such as the highway that you might be seeing there, as well
Correct.
as the environmental protections that are required for that period, housing development, education, you name it. So that's why I chose this photograph because at the end of the day, the budget is meant to help us in this fiscal year develop our country further.
Well, next time you're in that airplane, turn a little south and take a photo of the southern side.
I promise I will. And tell me about your backdrop. I see you're sporting a nice pair of darkers, as we would call it back in my time.
I think I call it the same thing. We're not that far off. Actually, that's a pair of Ray-Bans. And on the
Yes.
other side, that's my mom. And she's putting
Oh,
her
hello,
daughters as
Auntie.
well. And the reason why I choose a background of me and my mom is that it ties, the topic well because my mom is the one who taught me how to budget. I remember in primary
Ah,
school, I wanted a storybook that
mm-hmm.
had coloring in it. And based off of my allowance, she told me, hey, you can save this and you can put away some here and don't buy a snack there and so forth. And I will help you with the other half. And that's how I got that very It was a Goosebump books, one of those books that tells the
Oh,
story
yes,
to
yes,
different pages with multiple
yes.
endings.
I remember those. It was an innovation at the time.
Correct. And if it wasn't for my mom, I wouldn't know about that budgeting aspect from a young age. Knowing about the revenue in that aspect as my allowance and the expenditure as to what it is I wanted to buy, as well as the borrowing from her the half, so it come like was indebted to her, or I was given a loan, something like that. As we would
Yeah,
have discussed so on so many different levels and different pointers on our last episode, the economy.
correct. And it's important that we remind viewers to review that episode because, of course, it sets the context for tonight's discussion. And I believe, Anarion, a few more nights to come. Well,
Very well indeed, because we have so many various sectors, and here at Unboxing TNT, we want to tackle each and every one and unbox each episode, each sector actually. But let's not keep our viewers waiting. Let's dive right into the budget.
so we both heard pieces of it. I think, unfortunately, for you, you weren't able to listen to as much as I did because you were dealing with an unforeseen matter. And
Correct.
we're happy to still have you with us tonight because that matter could have distracted you. But what were your initial thoughts from what you heard on the radio or through social media so far about the general sentiment?
It came across as something new and innovative in the sense that there is a lot of talk around renewable energy and moving forward. Now, as you know, I'm an advocate for environmental sustainability and renewable energy, where I
Yes,
am
you
actually
are.
doing another degree in renewable and sustainability. So that caught my attention more than anything else. Also, moving away from my previous field in oil and gas, the fact that we still have a budget tied mainly to oil and gas
Hmm.
is something else that, brought forward my attention. But what about you? What caught your eyes and your ears, seeing that you are one of the financial persons here at our part?
Interestingly, I deliberately listened for the actual budget figures themselves, the high level revenue and expenditure numbers, because it is, of course, the 10th budget that this Minister of Finance has presented. And right off the bat, based on those expenditure and revenue figures, you would get an indication of where he's taking us a decade later from his first. And I must say that off the bat, the fact that we are settling around a $5 billion deficit indicates to me, Anarian, that we are heading in either a sustained position, sustained from where we've been for the last few years, COVID years notwithstanding.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's important for us to remind people that those 2 to 3 years need to be considered in their own context. But the rest of the years, uh, you found that the deficit became something that was accepted, as we discussed in the previous episode, because we simply could not generate additional revenues to overcome the necessary expenditures that we had to make as a country. So it was not surprising to see a deficit. Uh, but best case scenario, it also suggests that we're probably moving in a better direction than in the past, because $5 billion is, while still of course a large sum of money, relative to our economy and the conservative figures that were used to estimate the revenue, it is quite possible that that deficit could be reduced over the next fiscal year. So it's not insurmountable. And the only other thing I took away from the budget is that the length. It was indeed a long budget presentation. And
Yeah,
in a
it was.
way, I do want to commend the minister and the administration for taking the time, literally, to review some of the KPIs and the deliverables that were promised and their respective status as of today's date. I think that was important because I remember last year one of the criticisms was that he didn't spend enough time doing that, and that's what adds to the minutes. So those were my two main takeaways.
Well, it's nice to see that he's listening and he went more in depth into it. So, we can give him a round of applause for listening to the public in that regards.
Certainly, certainly, and I think the average citizen out there who tends to listen for their own specific area. As you
Mm-hmm.
could imagine, teachers may be listening for the allocations related to the education system. Doctors and nurses and maybe patients would be listening out for healthcare measures. Persons who are in the farming sector. So people tend to pick what is most relevant to them. But I
Okay.
found that I find that people should spend a little more time broadening their review of the budget, and that's why we're here, right, to help people unbox these types of topics. And for the revenue side, that 54.2 billion average is really made up of $14 billion from the oil and gas sector, with $35 billion coming from non-oil revenue and some nominal capital revenue of $4 billion. But what people should take away from that is, on a relative basis, the oil and gas sector by itself is the largest sector when compared to the others. That's why the word relative is important. However, do not misunderstand that. It does not mean that oil contributes, or oil and gas contributes all of our money.
Of course
When
not.
you line it up with the other sectors, it is the largest contributor. But altogether, the other sectors are actually contributing almost three times, in some
Wh-
cases, the
Which
oil
is
and
an
gas revenues.
issue I have with the way they phrase it, Rudolph. I don't
Mhm.
like how they group everything else and identify oil and gas alone because we are a country that have agriculture, we have
Yes,
beaches and tourism, we have sport and tourism, we have exports as well. And those other manufacturing areas, such as fertilizers, methanol, things like that, also contribute. But if it is
certainly.
we put all that in one basket, it becomes just two things. It becomes black and white, oil and gas and not oil and gas. And we need to move away from that concept here in Trinidad and Tobago because we're all
Yes.
about unity and diversification. So in that instance, that is one aspect of the budget I don't like, the way they phrase it.
Well, and we should note that actually for our viewers and subscribers, once you stay logged in over the next few weeks, we will be taking each of these areas, whether it's the revenue side or the expenditure side, and unboxing each one taking our time with sectors, industries, fiscal, and monetary policies so that you can get a sense of exactly what makes up these figures. Because what is also important to understand, as the minister himself said, that there are many conflicting demands when it comes to the expenditure lines, and it really is improbable to equally share funds across all of those sectors. So we are going to take a look at where monies have been allocated. And today, Anarian, we agreed we're not going to try and because it really wouldn't add value if we did. We're not going to unbox every single fiscal policy or comment made, but really unbox some of the key takeaways from both of us,
Right.
and
Yeah.
hopefully, in that vein, encourage other persons, whether they have an interest like we do or just as a general citizen. When you hear certain things in the presentation, what type of question should come to your mind? So and it should encourage you to listen to the rest of the budget, because the presentation is just one aspect. It kicks things off, but you then have the response from the opposition leader, which is followed by the debate, and then you have the committee level where all of the heads are broken down into their constituents. So I know you and I am going to we're going to be logged into Parliament channel for the next few weeks.
I mean, it's not like we don't already look at the Parliament channel ever so often.
Exactly.
And to our viewers out there, don't feel that you need to sit down for 5.5 hours continuously and listen to it. Because YouTube has this new thing with memory that if it is you stop your video at an hour and you go back to the same video, it continues there. So take your time when you're cooking dinner, whilst it is you're preparing the kids
Hmm.
for school in the morning. Take a listen to it, because at the end of the day, part of that revenue income is taxpayers' dollars, and that's your
Yes.
money working for you. So we need you to remember that. Now, Rudolph, you talked about how you listen to the figures. Oh, there you are. You brought it up. I was now going to ask, where were the allocations going? Or who got the biggest slice of the pie this year around?
Well, health and education were neck and neck, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
Health beat education out by by
A couple
a
millions.
capita. Yes.
Correct.
uh, but I thought that was a little surprising, actually. People would probably have presumed that national security would have been granted the lion's share. Uh, However, again, I think when you unbox some of these figures, it makes sense in a way, because at the end of the day, we spoke about the impact of NCDs, for example, on the economy in one of our
Mm,
earliest episodes. My memory serves correct, it might have been the very first episode we did of unboxing TNT, and we we really by cutting healthcare or allocating money away from healthcare and Arian into other sectors would literally be
mhm.
threatening people's lives. Now, you
Right,
could
as
say,
well as
well,
the same thing
national
with
security does the
education.
same. Uh
No,
huh.
but if you look at it the same way with education, by providing proper education, you take away from the life of crime from young people. So even
Yes.
though it's a bigger slice of the pie than national security, I would look at it as being nationally secured. Because if
Very
we
good
the
point. Yes.
empowerment of our children and our youths moving forward, having programs, having tech work skills, having education,
Mm.
takes away from the life of crime, and in the long term helps better national security.
And when we unbox each sector, we will find out some of the rationale behind these figures, of course. But I think
Of
the
course you
key
would.
takeaway for persons when they look at this allocation listing is to accept the fact that throwing money at problems is not always the answer. It
Right.
a solution to national issues is not always more money. Probably we are spending just as much as we need to. However, there might be issues of corruption, wastage, lack of productivity. Those issues sometimes
Oh, yeah.
undermine the allocation. So
I agree.
if I were to just have one takeaway from this allocation is that perhaps a lot over the years has already been invested in national security. We've heard in previous budgets about new vehicles, technology, the recruitment of additional police personnel. So money has been invested over the years, and some of those things do not need to repeat unless, of course, we're not maintaining the vehicles properly. And then, of course, every year we would have to replace them. So I could again, without looking at the details, they say the devil is in those details. I think that the
Of course.
allocations are reasonable. Reasonable. I must
Right.
admit, you would, I think you would agree with me. The fact that agriculture crossed 1 billion
Oh my,
is
yes.
telling. I think that is
It
very
is.
good. I think it is very good.
It really
So
is, of course.
so that is sort of where we are at with the high level figures, and again, we part will be releasing our own easy to reference graphics and visuals and reports around the budget as things unfold. I mean, of course, a lot of this information is already out there, but we tend to take a slightly different approach to how we communicate things here at our part, because at the end of the day, Anarion, we want to encourage everyone to do their part, right?
Of
And that
course.
sometimes means you need to break things down differently. So, so
Well,
where
we
should we
have.
start?
I am always about longevity and
Hmm.
wondering what new infrastructure or repairs to major infrastructure is going to take place within the next year. Because, as you very well know, there is the DB UB campus that is
Yes.
overrun with grass, and to me, that's a waste of money that would have been spent to build that institution that was never completed, as well as the Children's Hospital in
Hmm.
Kufa
Hmm.
that was built. It was fully furnished with equipment, and then we went on to not have it commissioned. Another waste of taxpayers' dollars, Rudolph. And that being said, I always look at what major projects they want to do within the next year and if it's a continuation from the year before or something totally new dreamt up.
Well, speaking about the years before, let's take in some of the context that the minister provided, and we'll go from there into listening some more about those infrastructure projects that he spoke about.
Okay, great.
Reflecting on the challenging circumstances that characterized our entry into office, it is essential to acknowledge the turbulent economic landscape which confronted us in 2015, with declining commodity prices and production levels, followed by COVID 19, global inflationary trends and shortages, conflicts in the Middle East, and the Russia Ukraine war. We had to manage this hostile economic environment in the face of an overdrawn government bank account and a disconnect between government expenditure and revenue, where expenditure had increased by 40% over the period 2010 to 2015 without a corresponding increase in revenue.
Anarion, I think that opening contextual piece by itself gives us something to think about. The fact that there were a number of economic challenges that, as a small island developing state, we had very little control over, uh,
Mm-hmm.
is a fair statement, I believe, for the minister to remind everyone that the administration, the public sector, the state agencies, all of us, we had to operate within a very dynamic and risky environment.
All right. Of course we did. And so did the rest of the world. And some countries are still recovering. And to know that what you would share later on with regards to GDP, which we discussed at length in our previous episode, The Economy, knowing that what he said about that, which you would share very shortly,
Mhm.
is a positive outlook for the country.
I agree. And I think that while there will be enough time to pick away at some of the individual policies and provide recommendations or perspectives on what may have been different, I do want to say that Trinidad and Tobago could have been in a much worse position than we are in today. And
Of
that
course.
says something about the resilience of the economy. So let's, but you did raise an important point around infrastructure. So let's listen to some of where he took us at the beginning in that regard. Uh, sorry,
Yeah.
let's take it in now at the beginning of our discussion and we'll
All
circle back. So, just for viewers' benefit, we're not necessarily going in order of how he presented the budget, but again, we're looking at things that stood out to Anarian and myself, uh, sort of what we thought should stand out to the average person out there as well, because some of these considerations have broad impact. So let's take in a little bit more from the minister.
Price of Brent crude in 2025 to be $84 a barrel. But we're going to be very conservative. Our oil price assumption for 2025 will be US $77.80 per barrel, compared with US $85 per barrel in 2024. And our natural gas price assumption will be US $3.59 per MMBTU, compared with US $5 per MMBTU in 2024. As a result of these assumptions, we expect total revenue of 54 billion to 54.224 billion, 54 billion 224 million, with total expenditure of 59.741 billion, resulting in a fiscal deficit of 5 billion 517 million dollars. The total estimated revenue of 54 billion 224 million comprises 14 billion 174 million in oil revenue, 35 billion, as I adverted before, and 39 million from non-oil revenue, and 4 billion and 11 million from capital revenue.
So, Anarian, there you have it from his mouth directly. He explained that the government is taking a very conservative, to use his word, a relatively conservative view on the oil and gas prices. And again, generally, they spend in as you said, because they spend a lot of time on the oil and gas figures, there could be a
Mm-hmm.
misconception out there that that is when he goes on to say that the revenue figures are actually going to be in the realm of 54 billion, people may develop the idea that all of that revenue is coming from oil and gas. But
But
as we
no,
explained earlier, it's not, right?
it's
So
only 14%, I believe, comes from
14 billion, 14 billion.
no
Yes.
percent wise.
It would be around 14, about 30%.
Right. I know you had a graphic up earlier about it. But yeah, that's a very small number. And the thing about oil and gas, Rudolph, is oil and gas, even though it's one of our largest exports, we s- that price is not determined by Trinidad and Tobago. It is determined by
That is
global factors.
excellent point. Yes.
And that being said, at any day, OPEC could decide they're going to drop the price, they're going to raise the price.
Yes.
Whether it is, let's say, the United States decides they're going to go hard into hydraulic fracking, that and all affects the
Yes.
prices.
Certainly.
The
Or if
fact
there
that
is an unfortunate
war or
war,
situation,
economic
yeah,
conflict. Yes.
correct. But most importantly, the transition from fossil fuel to renewable energy and countries no longer requiring to buy oil and gas to turn their turbines and and generate electricity
Yes.
is going to be a major downfall for Trinidad and Tobago until it is we learn to diversify our economy.
Now, just to reinforce what you said, there are already car companies in Trinidad, car distribution companies in Trinidad and Tobago that have been forced to only sell electric vehicles because the parent companies have decided that they are no longer going to actually manufacture combustion
Oh
engine
wow!
cars. So this transition is happening faster than we might have liked it to for our sakes. But India and other large economies have already stated that they are moving towards transitioning to full electric within the next few decades. I mean, I just came back from Switzerland, for example, and I will tell you, it was a risk crossing those streets because you take for granted the white noise that all these engines create around you.
Uh huh.
There were so many cars, but they're all electric. So
Right.
I couldn't understand why they nearly bounced me down because I couldn't hear them. So it's really interesting to see what is going on in the rest of the world. And of course, in the budget, the minister did reference the fact that the government had already removed all the taxes from electric vehicles, and now there are some provisions that support the electrification move for the charging stations. So, to your point, when people hear these figures, they need to take them in that context that they shift. They do not stay constant because we said that they should. We don't
Correct.
control those figures. So that is why during the fiscal year, there are times when the actual revenue figures will change and the government may have to return to the parliament to get additional funds. So
No, but
that
look
is
at,
an
for
important point
example,
to make.
the year 23 to 24 fiscal year, we had, again, we ran a financial deficit
Yes.
and funds were allocated. However, we had an emergency situation in Tobago with an oil tankers being
Ah,
spilled
yes.
that we
People
needed
they
help from
forget.
in-
Yes.
international agencies as well as we needed to borrow money from IDB to clean up that. And that is something that we now have to pay back. And by having to repay,
Yes.
it needs to be taken into consideration for 24 to 25, 25 to 26, and so forth until it clears the debt. So these everything that happens affects something, some way,
Something
somehow.
else. And we explained that in our previous episode. So again, if you'd like to understand a little bit more about how the economy works and now what the impact of these fiscal and monetary policies will actually be, you can review our last episode and remember to subscribe. So let's take in a little bit more again because I really am hoping, Anarion, that our viewers and subscribers out there also through this program are getting to understand how some of the layers within the budget, as you just said, actually interplay with each other. So nothing that he is sharing operates in a vacuum. So let's see what else we took away.
Economic challenges that beset us, we implemented a targeted fiscal consolidation strategy and a medium term economic framework designed to rein in expenditure, revitalize economic activity, and restore fiscal stability. We also made a major adjustment to our petroleum taxation regime by implementing a 12.5% royalty on oil and gas production across the board, which ensured that no matter what the price of oil and gas is, we get significant revenue. This was in stark contrast to the pre 2015 situation, where the petroleum taxation regime was so short sighted that it allowed a major energy company to tell us, as the incoming government in 2015, that the country would get no income from them for 9 years until 2024. We also negotiated a greater share of energy revenues, and we successfully restructured the Atlantic LNG profit sharing arrangements, giving us significantly greater returns for the benefit of the people of Trinidad and Tobago.
So Anarian, again, directly to your earlier point, he's
Mhm.
explaining here how the country, in the face of pricing that we cannot control, were able to utilize negotiations around the taxation and the revenue sharing arrangements to
Right.
ensure that we got additional revenue. So, all right, we know we can't change the price, but what else can we do to ensure that we get the best bang for our buck? After all, it's our natural resources, right? So, the, again, this is an important point that people probably are taking for granted is that we could have adopted a much more passive approach and said, look, that's the agreement that has already always existed for the last few decades. Let's leave it alone. But the government has been pushing the fact, and rightly so, I think, that they were the ones that went and renegotiated. Now, again,
Right.
you could sort of push back and say, well, is that the best you could have got? Maybe they could have got more, but all we are trying to do again is to highlight how the government has been dealing with some of the challenges. And as a citizen out there, your role is to understand the challenge, listen and understand what the solution is has been or is being proposed to be, and you have to then get involved and ask the right questions. So, all right, take this for example. You've renegotiated contracts for a certain period. Can we then presume that moving forward that would continue to be the order of the day? So when should these contracts be renegotiated? How often? And what are some of the other things that we can include in the contract that facilitates national development in other territories? Foreign direct investors have quotas as to the number of people they must hire, the type of training and knowledge transfer, the CSR components, things like that. So I thought that was an important inflection point based that answers some of the questions you raised.
Right. Yeah. Of course. And again, we urge persons to understand that we're not doing a deep dive into this. We're just looking at topics that were interesting to both of us. and we urge you to listen to the entire budget presentation.
So let's see what's up next here, because you and I went through some of this and we would have selected these clips again because we think they are raising certain important
No
questions.
small task to achieve these objectives in the face of diminishing resources, low commodity prices, a global pandemic, and heightened global uncertainty and instability over the last 9 years. Looking ahead, there is no avoiding the fact that the energy sector will be a major contributor to our economic survival for years to come. However, because oil and gas are diminishing resources and commodity prices are volatile, we must continue to support, build, and strengthen the non energy sector while simultaneously reinforcing the resilience and sustainability of our energy industry.
I couldn't have said
Interesting
it any better.
point. Yes,
Because we are tied to oil and gas. Like Guyana is tied to it now, whereas before it
yes,
would have been
yes.
tied to the price of gold. But we are tied to oil and gas, yet we're looking to build a sustainable future. And we need to look at expanding, which is what I said at the very beginning, and what
Hmm.
we've said. You and I have had conversations about this on numerous occasions, and we want you all to start having those conversations. Maybe one of these days you can be a farmer and you
Hmm.
can create a cassava chip or a breadfruit chip that could be
Ah, there
exported.
you go. Yes,
And
yes.
that exportation is going to bring in foreign exchange and it's going to build our economy. So
I,
you have a part to play.
the main criticism that some sectors or thought leaders and commentators have, of course, expressed is that the government seemed to have not been able to walk and chew gum at the same time, meaning uh, they keep doubling down on the fact that they put a lot of focus on restructuring the energy space. And again, the minister has been very straightforward. He spoke about the challenges of the last 9 years and the fact that they, as a government, their policy is fix the energy space because that's, again, relatively the single sector that contributes the most when compared to all the others.
Mhm,
And perhaps at the same time, once you get some additional revenues coming in, you can invest in other areas. That's what I'm hearing from him. Again, as citizens, we now have to be vigilant, and whether whichever sector we come from, we have to ask questions and ensure that any windfalls or investments in those areas are being used to the best so that those sectors will grow, as Anarion said. So I'm following him so far. I I
yeah,
I I really can't find uh,
fault.
a fault as yet from a policy point of view. I could understand this approach, and again, the commentators. Uh, I myself, from time to time, have looked at other sectors. You know, we've had this conversation, whether it's sports, the creative fields of endeavor, even tourism. There's always more that we can do. We do have limited resources. Let's see where he takes us next.
I couldn't call out all 100. Energy. Madam Speaker, Trinidad and Tobago remains an attractive province for investors due to our stable political, fiscal, and policy environment. Over the period 2018 to 2021, an estimated US $7.5 billion or TT 50.4 billion was invested in this country's energy sector. Foreign direct investment in the upstream sector by oil and gas companies was US 1.4 billion for 2022, US 1.2 billion for 2023, and estimated to be in the vicinity of US 2 billion and US 2.3 billion for 2024 and
Well, Again, you can't argue with the data.
Of course, there's no arguing with data, and he reiterated everything there over the 2018 to 2021 duration, where it is we went into the pandemic, and like I was explaining to you on a previous occasion,
Mhm.
that oil and gas price, even though the prices may have been high, there was less usage of it because of a global pandemic where persons were restricted
Correct.
with movements.
Yes.
So whilst we were producing a fair amount, we were selling less than we were producing.
Yeah.
So the supply and demand there would have switched where we had more supply and less demand.
And this is why, again, you have to look at these economic indicators and consider them in their right context. Again, could we pre-pandemic have developed the economy in such a way that perhaps the Heritage and Stabilization Fund would have been much larger than it was at the time? Or could we have been already advanced when it came to working from home, for example, studying from home, so that the transition would not have been so stark, and we would not have had to suffer the issues with the digital divide where children dropped out of school? Hindsight is 2020. I personally think, Anarian, that we could have been in a better position when COVID-19 hit us. You and
Mhm.
I might understand why we were where were at, but you cannot change the past. What I am hearing is that, again, whether we like the energy sector or not, whether we are proponents of other sectors being developed, I would be hard pressed, as would anybody else, to find any other sector with that large volume of foreign direct investment. And that
Yeah,
money does have a positive multiplier effect on the economy, which again we did touch on in our last episode. So let's see where we go from
What
there.
can be done within reason to stimulate further exploration and production so that appropriate adjustments can be made to the oil and gas taxation regime in the first quarter of 2025 through a finance bill. In 2025, the government also plans to reallocate acreage where feasible to allow lease operators to produce oil from inactive fields which have proven reserves of oil can be quickly brought into production with a proactive program of drilling. Madam Speaker, I extend my deepest gratitude to my colleagues for their immense support and insightful policy recommendations, which have been instrumental in accelerating our nation's socio-economic development. I also wish to acknowledge the valuable input from our stakeholders in both the public and private sectors, whose perspectives have enriched our policy choices and strengthened our resolve.
So again, we are getting some insights, Anarian, into what is being planned to deal with some of the production issues you touched on at the beginning of the
right. Yeah.
conversation. And that is again is signaling to the population that as an administration, they are telling you from now that over the next few years, this is what they are going to be focused on. You have to decide if that is a policy recommendation that you agree with, and if it makes sense to you, and if you are seeing the benefits of it.
Well, yeah. And when we do get into the energy sector conversation, you'd understand, we'll be able to better explain to persons how we don't actually make revenue from drilling, it's from selling and things like that. We'd go more in
Mhm.
depth into that and how that revenue aspect works further on. So let's hear what our minister has to say next.
I couldn't call out all 100. Energy. Madam Speaker, Trinidad and Tobago remains an attractive province for investors due to our stable political, fiscal, and policy environment.
So again, he's continuing to talk about the fact that we are attractive for investment in the energy space, which is very good. And
Right.
I think that the not I think it's proven that that type of investment will bring other benefits to the society.
Of course.
Financial security and bolster public confidence in the stability of our financial institutions. There is no cost to the public since it is expected that financial institutions will absorb the increased premiums. Moving now to infrastructure, highways, and drainage. Our commitment to infrastructure modernization remains unwavering. We are actively engaged in the improvement of our road network, encompassing primary highways, major arteries, and strategically selected secondary routes. Concurrently, we are dedicating significant resources on the enhancement of our drainage systems. These efforts, coupled with our ongoing endeavors to fortify our coastal defenses, represent a multifaceted approach to mitigating the challenges created by climate change.
Well, there you
Ooh,
go.
he
He
touched on a
actually,
topic that's very near and dear to both of our hearts.
yes,
And the fact that he mentioned drainage system, you all can take a look at our entire conversation, 1 hour long plus 1 hour plus long conversation on
yes,
flooding across Trinidad and Tobago. But what I like to hear is the fact of modernization with regards to infrastructure.
certainly,
As
certainly.
you know, most recently I was down at the Point Fortin Hospital dealing with some personal issues. And
Yes,
Rudolph, the equipment, the response, the atmosphere, it's just amazing. It is a state of the art hospital. Unlike other places I've been to,
yes.
like San Fernando, which was the nearest other general hospital to me. Point Fortin is what I envisioned we should have had 10 years ago. So I'm hoping with the development of the Arima Hospital and moving forward
Which is my
that
area. Yes.
that we get to where we should be with more state of the art equipment.
So
Because
again,
I
another
saw in
positive
acts,
signal.
yeah, I saw X-ray machines being rolled out to the patients and not the patients going to a room.
Well, in this budget as well, he mentioned even the medical robots that we purchased.
Ooh,
And I
nice.
found that very interesting when it was reported in newspapers a few weeks ago. Let's see where he takes us now.
80% of the construction works have already been accomplished, and the project is on track for completion in 2025. This project utilizes both local and foreign workers on site. The operationalization of this most modern, state of the art airport terminal in the region will support tourism and the economic development of Tobago. The costs associated with this terminal building and associated airside and landside infrastructure is 130 million US dollars or 885 million Trinidad and Tobago dollars. I now move to urban redevelopment.
Wow. You know, people, I love Tobago. You know that. I
Yeah.
actually would love to live in Tobago, live and work in Tobago if I could. And this year, the government actually gave Tobago a nominal amount over the the minimum that is required by law. But at the same time, the budget also spoke to just over 680 million additional dollars that will be spent in Tobago. What do you think, Anarion, about that sort of sharing arrangement? I mean, there's so many schools of thought, right? Given Tobago's size and some of the demands that they have. But
Well,
what are your thoughts?
so in total, if I remember correct, it's 2 point something billion they give them.
Hmm.
Plus the
Yeah, just
600.
under three.
Let's
Yes.
round up to 3 million, right?
3 billion. Yeah.
3 billion, sorry. Out of the 54 billion allocated for Trinidad and Tobago. So that's
Yes.
51 million for Trinidad. Now, I understand Trinidad is larger than Tobago and we have the higher population. However, Tobago is an international tourist destination. That
Yes.
being said, persons come to Trinidad just to go to Tobago. And I would like to see Tobago. I mean, by law, they're supposed to get a certain amount, but I want to see the development. And I think, touching on a near very sensitive topic in the atmosphere right now, is the property tax, where the property tax was supposed
Yes.
to be given to the local government representatives to be able
Yes.
to do work within their district. So I would love to know that the accountability and the transparency behind the property tax collection in Tobago stays in Tobago and develops those communities. So when persons come across in regards to proper road access infrastructure, beach facilities, things like that, for tourists to have a wonderful time, recommend it to their friends and their families to continue our
Yes.
ecotourism.
Well, I I will not argue with you because again, as I said, I'm biased towards Tobago, and we do need to put our best foot forward for the territory within the country that attracts relatively the most tourism dollars during the whole year, not just at carnival time.
Correct.
The Trinidad and Tobago Police Service aims to expand its fleet by 2,000 vehicles over the next 3 years, with 500 vehicles expected in the first phase. Building the capacity of our police force is crucial, and the police service plans to focus on specialized training for officers with ongoing development efforts at the police academy. A new training facility will be established at Kamuto to support both new recruits and the continuous development of serving officers. While the road ahead may seem challenging, I wish to emphasize that every effort being made is driven by a deep seated concern for the well being of every citizen. We understand that behind every statistic is a person, a family, a community that deserves to feel safe and secure.
Again, it as we said at the beginning, I think people were expecting crime, well, national security and crime prevention to get the highest allocation. But this point, I think, reinforces what we were discussing at the beginning of the conversation. Training costs would naturally be relatively lower in most cases than purchasing of plant and equipment. So I
Right,
know
yeah.
over the years the country has expended money to build new stations already. So when you drive around Trinidad, you do see relatively new police stations,
I
and you're
agree there.
seeing the vehicles and the motorcycles, etc. So this again shows that the government is focusing on crime again in its own way, as all citizens have to decide now if these policies are what they deem to be fit. Tonight, we're not getting into that assessment. We are simply unboxing what is in front of us. So, the budget has covered several areas that are important to many different people and should be important to everyone because agriculture, crime, national security, education, they all affect us. But as I said earlier, Narian, some people look at what is directly in front of them.
Correct. And it's
So
a good
let's
thing
see.
you reiterated that aspect of not unboxing things, because there's something about the money and the purchasing of new vehicles that irks me so bad.
Really?
Do you want me to go off script and tell you? You
Sure.
make the call. So we have thousands, hundreds, if not thousands, of police vehicles put down that are
That is a
collecting
fact. That is a
collecting
fact. Yes.
grass that is overrun with bush, and it's for simple reasons like a spark plug wasn't changed or some sort of maintenance, things
Well,
like that. And I have always said support small and micro enterprises. We have scrap
yes.
iron dealers. Sell the vehicles to the scrap iron persons. Let them cut it up and make a living for themselves. So you're doing empowerment and keeping money within the circle there. But the money that you make from that, what the scrap iron persons buy it with, goes back towards the police purchasing of new vehicles or
Yeah.
maintenance and things like that. And that irks me so bad that it's just put down there rotting.
Well, I know in future episodes over the next few weeks, as we said, we're going to really get into some of the details. So let's just take in a few quick clips in some of that cover some of the other areas that he touched on, and we'll be able to get a sense this evening as to where overall our budget is taking us.
Okay, great.
Comprises approximately 108 laws, has recently been added to the program. In fiscal 2025, the Land Settlement Agency will be engaged in further site developments, including La Romaine, Grand Couva, and Cap d'Iville. I move now to education. Madam Speaker, it is crucial to recognize that the future of our children and our nation rests upon a solid foundation, a robust education system. In the past decade, we have not merely discussed enhancements, we have turned words into action. The government has been actively engaged in various initiatives and projects aimed at ensuring that our education system remains contemporary, pertinent, and accessible to all stakeholders. In the previous
So, education, of course, you touched on it earlier. You're hearing the reporting aspects, what references to what has been done already and what is to come. We have unboxed education, and we have pointed out some of the issues and gaps, and there are some provisions in this budget that seek to treat with infrastructure issues, teachers' salaries, and other issues that we've touched on, of course. And then I believe he would have also touched here on,
period,
let's see.
we have spent over $3.2 billion in net subsidy payments for 2.9 billion liters of gasoline fuel, 1.9 billion liters of diesel fuel, and 71 million liters of kerosene, impacting thousands of licensed gasoline and diesel vehicles, which on a daily basis supports the travel.
So here he's talking a little bit about the transfers and subsidies, which of course adds up greatly. I was pleased for the taxi drivers and those among us who have very fixed incomes that the current provisions were maintained when it comes to the fuel subsidies. So that of course is going to create some stability in the market. And then I do believe we have two more areas that we thought would have been interesting. Let's see where this one takes
Underscore
us.
the seriousness of this intractable problem. The Ministry of National Security thus remains committed to enhancing the country's capacity and capability of treating with crime and criminality in Trinidad and Tobago. In 2024, initiatives executed under the Ministry of National Security to combat crime and criminality focused on building capacity and strengthening the national security apparatus and institutions.
So you see, that is where within the budget, when you're listening to the budget or reading it, you're going to find that things are mentioned in on different pages or in different segments that relate to another segment that has been covered, and that was an example right there of the minister explaining what is to come, having shared what was done before. So he's trying to make the case that they're building on provisions that they would have implemented in some of the prior years.
From the year before, and that is how it should be. There should always be some sort of continuity with regards to projects.
The fourth special project, divestment of CLICO. The government intends to sell its 49% shareholding in the Colonial Life Insurance Company. CLICO is no longer considered to be of strategic importance to the government, and its investment, its divestment will earn several billion dollars in revenue for the government.
Now, Anarion, that of course is a bit of news that many people in the society were waiting to hear about. It's been so many years since the government had to bail out CLICO, since the Manning administration.
Correct.
And of course, the minister went on to speak about the fact that the government still hasn't received all of the money. I think he mentioned we are still owed somewhere in the vicinity of $11 billion, could be a little bit more. But he made the point
Actually, it's
clear.
13 billion.
13. He made the
Yeah.
point that the government doesn't want to be in the insurance business, basically. So, uh, so again, it was a long budget. It touched on a number of different areas, and I think just to cap it all off, we'll take in one last clip, and then we'll share some of our closing thoughts as we prepare for the next weeks ahead for us here at Unboxing TNT.
Of course.
It should be apparent that these are conflicting demands, since we can't apportion the lion's share of the budget to so many different sectors, especially with scarce resources. I tell you. Accordingly, we have allocated substantial resources to each of these sectors consistent with national priorities.
I
So,
mean,
Anarion,
I don't
yes.
disagree with him, Rudolph. Now, whilst, like we said before, others may be expecting national security to get the largest part of the pie, there are other things that take precedent. I don't want to make it seem like we're prioritizing other stuff, but I think
But you have to sometimes, you have no choice.
the budget was an amazing budget. It was well read, and I think the allocations were justifiable.
Well,
The,
the point he was making about CLICO and the special projects, those deal with the the how do we treat with the deficit. So the
right,
revenue figures are separate to these special projects that he was mentioning. So there is a plan again as to how do we make up the shortfall. In prior years, the government borrowed a lot more. I have to review it again, and over the next few days, we will be looking at the details. Uh, there might be some borrowing in there that I didn't pick up as yet. I'm sure there is in some form of fashion.
yeah,
However, divesting CLICO, for example, will bring in a couple $1 billion and some of the other special projects that he spoke about. So I think we definitely have to dedicate an unboxing to those special projects and look at them. But Anara, I mean, it's 1 hour that we allocate for this podcast. We know it's a lot to unbox, right? But
correct.
you made the point that you thought the budget was amazing and that it was well written, well read, it was reasonable. I adopt the fact that it is a reasonable budget. I concur with you that it was well presented in terms of taking the time, as I said at the beginning, to carry citizens through over the last decade, because 10 years really is a milestone. And I think it would have been remiss of the minister if he
Mhm.
hadn't returned to some of what people tend to forget over the years and connect the dots, as it were, looking back and forward. If I had one initial uh, constructive bit of criticism, it would be that I do think it it the citizens, especially people from certain sectors, were expecting a little bit more in terms of support for them to get ahead a little faster in their lives, especially those in the middle class and the lower socioeconomic bracket. There was a thread within the
Mm-hmm.
budget, and when you get a chance to listen to the whole thing or read the entire thing, you would hear him mention from time to time that we have to still hold strain for the next 2 to 3 years. So there was this overarching uh, delimiting factor that, look, we're doing as much as we can. We're not out of the woods yet. We're doing okay. We're doing better. He spoke about the growth figures, but kind of
Mm-hmm.
like prepare yourself. And I honestly speaking, I want to move out of that, Anarian. And, but I know as probably the perfect segue, we all have a part to play in moving out of that, right?
Right.
Um, so
Well,
that's
you have
why
your
we're here.
part, and I have my
Yeah,
part,
and
and
if we
together
do
we
it
have our part.
together, we do our part. So
So the next major part in this entire budget thing comes up on Friday afternoon when the opposition leader prepares
certainly,
her statement.
yes,
And we invite you
certainly,
to join us again that Friday afternoon. That will be Friday, the 4th of October, where we would like to do a live video, a live recording of Unbox TNT, just to discuss what she did and her response to Mr. Emmett's budget statement.
yes. Because from the following Monday, we intend to utilize the debate sessions to unbox various sectors and fiscal and monetary policies that are relevant to those sectors. So again, folks, we said it earlier, but we'll say it again. As our email address says, we must do at ourpart.org. I must do my part, you must do your part, and together
And
we'll do our
together we
part.
must
So,
part.
Anarian, I'll do your job for you tonight. I'll do your part tonight. Remember to subscribe on our YouTube channels and follow us on social media. And I'm really looking forward to the next few weeks in Arian as we continue to unbox the TNT budget.
Of course. And again, thank you folks for joining us. It's a pleasure. Thank you to our loyal supporters. Remember to share with your friends. And if you have something you want us to unbox here, or be free to email us or send us a direct message, and we'll get to your topic. Take care and be safe out there.
And be safe. Cheers.